My name is Lindenblatt, and
my name is Renee Jones.
And so we are co-mediators. We're mediators as well, but we co-mediate together. And figured it was a good opportunity to speak about the who, what, where, and when, what it's all about, what co-mediation is all about. I mean, if people are familiar with mediation, you'll sort of have an understanding that co-mediation is similar, but really talking about the nuances that exist in co-mediation and the advantage we believe that co-mediation brings can bring to your practice. So first of all and foremost, got that hand there, we good? Did you want me to?
Do you have the?
It's right here.
Oh, okay. So you can, it's attached, so we have to stay close anyway, so we'll just leave it there.
Okay, so first of all, what is co-mediation? So, yeah, it's a mediation with two neutrals who facilitate conflict between two or more parties. Okay, so there are two of us there instead of one. Two neutrals, facilitators, mediators working together. So just a little bit of history of how Renee and I started working together. So I started a practice. I'm a counselor at the Caring Counseling Center of Georgia. I actually went to Georgia State. Over here I got my master's. I have a law background as well, and saw an opportunity. Actually, they give a course, I think, in mediation here as well. It just didn't work out for me, so I took it in different places. Sort of trying to think of sort of enhancing my counseling practice. And so working at the Caring Counseling Center of Georgia, and Renee was going for her BS in counseling. What was that, Renee? Where were you going for your meeting?
Atlanta Christian College.
There you go. And so she interviewed me with regards to what mediation is all about, and we sort of created a partnership with each other. We good?
Yeah, we're just trying to pause it. Right here?
Oh, there's a pause. Thank you.
Click on that. Pause.
Okay. There we go.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Love participation from the audience, especially the council's PowerPoints.
It's all about the collaborative process.
There you go. There you go. So, so both of us started working together, and we've been working over a year trying to build a mediation practice. So that is a little bit about working together, really using the opportunity of each other, and we'll talk about some of the advantages that exist when we co-mediate. We'll go on to the when. Okay, these are possibilities of thinking about when is it a good idea to mediate. So the case is complex, let's be honest. A lot of cases can be complex, but again, somehow you sort of got an inclination within you and you're saying, you know what, there's a lot of factors here, a lot of parties, a lot of things going on. There might be even some emotional intents that you've received, you know, on the phone, speaking, sort of arranging parties, where you're getting your referrals from. I get many referrals from the counselors themselves, trying to deal with counseling, and then for saying, okay, I think this is an opportunity for mediation, so you speak to the counselor what it's all about, and it might be an opportunity to say, you know what, there's a lot of emotional going on here. As most of you are familiar that if you also have now, you need special training for domestic violence. There could be opportunities there as well to think about co-mediating under those circumstances if you both have experience in that area. That might be a great idea to deal with co-mediation. Cultural balance or gender. Actually thinking about how to make the clients comfortable. Many times it's an opportunity to think about co-mediation. I was working on a co-mediation in Fulton County, and the case was a domestic case between, the man was Native American, and he had married someone who was Euro-American, basically, non-Indian, and they had two children, and there was a lot of tension and concern that he had that he would not be understood. Now, I'm not a Native American, as you can tell. I'm not. Cherokees are great people, but I'm a Jewish person, and the fact is that he had a certain rapport with me because he felt that I was sort of on the outside a little bit, being Jewish, not sort of part of the mainstream, sort of the minority, and therefore I think that he was able to express himself more, felt more comfortable under those circumstances. Again, we were co-mediating, so perhaps she would feel comfortable as well having someone, for example, part of the mainstream, whatever it is, basically working together under those circumstances. We found together that, especially for most of our mediation work is in divorce, that it works out pretty well to have a male and female there. And in Georgia, it still is the law that most divorces take place between males and females, even though we've been open in our own practice to think about basically people who come together who are the same gender, etc. But again, the reality is that divorces are between male and female, and actually it's been very positive that we've been working together, being from a different gender, and therefore the clients can feel more comfortable under those circumstances. As I mentioned, there are a large number of parties. You can think of these major mediations that take place. Everybody thinks about football and other things. I don't know how many mediators are involved before following that situation, but I think when you have a second person there working with you, it actually is really very helpful. You lessen sort of the load under those circumstances. You're early in your career. That's a great opportunity. I think co-mediation really should be at the forefront of the way people should sort of start mediation. Many times the courts, I think, sort of almost require it, whether you're observing or you're co-mediating with someone, and you learn different styles from different people, and it's really a great opportunity. And I tell you what, I do a little martial arts on the side, so it helps in the mediation process. Anyway, I found that one of the things that have been very helpful when, whether I was teaching martial arts or participating, is when you have sort of rookies or newer people in there. So what happens is that you sort of have to really recheck of how you're doing. So it's no longer, the dance. So you've been training a few years, and you've been training for a few years in your martial arts, and you sort of know exactly where the punches are coming, and you sort of almost feel like it's a dance. But when you bring someone in who's not sort of new at this, actually they might see something that you're missing, or there might be something that's totally off. So it's really helpful, not only for the person themselves who's early in their career, but actually the mediators that would like to be involved in those areas. Subject matter is unfamiliar. Let me talk a little bit about this, and actually almost from the other side when it's too familiar. But I think the mediation that's out there, and let's just be honest, in the teaching that's out there, it's a lot about process. They talk about process. I'm all for process. I think that's really, really important, and it's really helpful as a mediator. But sometimes it's about sort of the area of law that is going on. You might have almost no idea what's going on. And the truth is, probably if you're a good mediator, you can get through it. But the question is whether the clients themselves feel comfortable, like, well, I don't know anything about this, or tell me more about it. And sometimes it might be helpful to have someone else in there who has a certain amount of expertise. Now, I will say that actually I think it's best to have only one person sort of an expert, because if two people are experts, you're going to get a feeling that you want to really sell your law and all you know about that area. Because sometimes that could be a detriment when a person has a tremendous expertise in a certain area. Just mention one of the case that I was involved in. I was observing a case in Fulton County, and this person was in tax for many, many years, and it was a dispute between, I think it was the city and this poor woman who was trying to make sure she could perhaps mediate the situation. And he was very, very strong on her, like, you think you can get this case? He was very, very condescending of her because he was so familiar with the tax law. They didn't give her an opportunity at least to express herself, at least to think about if there's any possibilities of compromise, and I actually came out of there sick. It was like watching this guy do this. But this is an expert, so it was really, really important. But again, if one is unfamiliar, it might be very helpful to bring in someone else and have them there, and obviously a mediator in that area. And one other thing about when to think about it is that if it's a particular skill set would be useful. Thinking, for example, if there's a language barrier or something else, having someone else in there who's actually much more familiar with the language. I'm speaking like Spanish or French or some other language. It might be helpful under those circumstances to co-mediate. So again, we're big fans of co-mediation in a lot of cases, but even if you're thinking of expanding your practice and thinking, okay, I want to mediate myself, but what areas do I think I'd be helpful to co-mediate? These, again, is where the cases are complex, where perhaps there are gender biases, where you think under those circumstances that it's a complex case, there are many, many parties, and let me bring in someone else to help me with the load. And again, if the subject matter is really, you're unfamiliar with it, trying to bring in someone, an expert in that area to help you co-mediate.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we'll co-mediate as soon as I get to the next slide. All right, I'm going to try to pause it so that I don't skip one. So why would you want to co-mediate? Stephen talked a lot about when would be good cases when you might want to bring in a co-mediator if you're not already co-mediating in your practice. But there are lots of reasons why bringing in a co-mediator is a good idea. For one, most of the time, depending on the type of case or type of practice you have, you're dealing with people who mediation is somewhat foreign to them. Most people don't go to mediation several times in their lifetime or regularly. And so a big, important part of helping them through this really unfamiliar process is establishing a foundation of trust. They need to understand, they need to trust that you know what you're doing, that this process that they're not familiar with is actually going to help them resolve or at least get some understanding around a conflict that they're having. And when you have a co-mediator in there with you, you just really double your opportunity to connect with the parties. And these are the sorts of connections I'm talking about, are just the things you say when you're meeting someone in the foyer of the office, when you're just introducing yourself, or you're talking about, are you from Atlanta? Have you been here long? Oh, I'm from that region also. These little things like that go a long way toward establishing that foundation, that making sure the parties can relate to you. And when you have two mediators, you just really have more opportunities for that, more opportunities for the party to relax and feel more comfortable with the mediators. You also get the benefit of more experiences. When you have two mediators in the room, they bring with them the wealth of their life experiences. Not just their experience mediating or whatever their profession of origin is, but also just things that they've been through, things that they've seen. And these things come out in just simple ways throughout the mediation. Maybe it's just a reference to, I don't know, a ball game that everyone knew about, or some World Series or something to that extent. Even if it's a movie or something like that, you're bringing all of those experiences in, and the parties start to feel like they really get to know you, or at least feel that you can relate to them. And so when you have two mediators, you're bringing all of those life experiences in. You're also bringing in mediators who may have seen this particular conflict before, may have seen a way that it was resolved before, may have seen a solution that worked for another group or another party before, and they can say, let me share something with you that I've seen work for other parties in a similar situation, and you can think about this and decide if that may be something that could work for you. Another great reason to bring in a co-mediator is to share the load. Depending on what kind of mediation you're doing, it can be a very heavy emotional load to bear, especially if you're dealing with domestic relations, or even if you're doing workplace, workers' comp, sexual harassment. Lots of things come out in mediation, and it can be a lot for you as an individual to manage. Empathizing with each party and just kind of accepting what they're giving you, especially like if you're in caucus and they're explaining to you why this particular issue is so important because of something that happened before, and they're kind of giving you all this stuff, and you gotta hold that for them so that they can go into this process and really make good decisions. And you're doing that with two parties, sometimes more parties. So when you have a co-mediator, it really helps to have someone along to help you share that load. Another set of eyes and ears. Mediation is a lot about what's said, but it's also a lot about what you hear below the surface. It's a lot about observing the body language and how people react. And when you have a co-mediator there, you have another person there with you, helping you to observe the clients as they're reacting to the different topics that you're discussing and the decisions that you're trying to make. And then also, it really helps to have a co-mediator so you can model cooperation. I mean, you've got two people there who are trying to work through an issue, and when you're working with someone, you're actually modeling how they can make these decisions as well. So how can you incorporate co-mediation into your practice? There are a couple of different ways to think about it. Can you see this right here? There are a couple of different ways to think about how to co-mediate. So we'll just talk about a few of them. One model of co-mediating is front seat, back seat, which is sort of like one mediator drives the process and the other mediator really focuses on listening and observing the body language, picking up on the nonverbal cues, and really trying to pay attention to the parties as they're moving through the process. And then the mediators share information either in formal break or in the way that they decided to communicate with each other. They can share that information. So one person is really focused on the process. The other person is really focused and paying attention to the parties, listening for those messages that are more subtle, that are not directly spoken. Another way is division of labor. You could just say, I'm going to handle the discussion of custody and child support, and you're going to drive the process when we're talking about taxes and dividing up the furnishings. You could just divide it up that way. Stage balcony is more of when someone is pretty new to mediating or if they're really unfamiliar with the topic. And stage balcony really is to the benefit of the mediator. So you've got someone who's really just observing and you're running the mediation and they're observing you as a mediator and helping you better yourself. A lot of clients are uncomfortable if you ask about videotaping a mediation because it's confidential. And so if you're mediating alone, you really, you don't have any kind of objective feedback. You can speak to the clients, but they could be mad at you because they didn't get their way, right? So if you're co-mediating with someone purely for the benefit of understanding how you are as a mediator and how you're relating to clients and how closely you're sticking to the process, stage balcony is that sort of a setup. And then a go with the flow is really the way that Stephen and I mediate, and if you have a rapport with someone, it's a good way to mediate where you just kind of give, you allow room, which is really how I would describe it. We leave room for each other to step in throughout the process. And so we kind of check in with each other with eye contact and see where the other person wants to go. And we also check in with each other a little bit more formally, which we'll talk about in the practical part of that. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so with every good, there may be some bad. So how do we make sure that we don't fall into something when we are co-mediating with each other? The reality is that if we're concerned about ourselves, concerned about the process, then we might be in a good situation. But sometimes we feel that we're not being heard as a mediator. We feel the other mediator is saying too much, or we feel that I want to get my 2 cents in. So what happens is that you can have a sort of a competition. Like when you play tennis and doubles and sort of the ball goes through the middle and you complain about who should have went for it. The reality is there is a sense of competition, maybe being aware of that. I think what happens is the more and more you get used to working with a specific mediator, you have discussions after the mediation. Did you feel that somebody took it too far, etc.? So there's I want us to be careful and sort of cognizant of one's sort of inner self of saying, I like to be in the head of this mediation. There's only one king, right? But whatever. But the fact is that competition is an important part to be aware of. Time, it can take time. For example, in situations where you have to be aware of trying to create equal time. It depends exactly, as Renee mentioned, what type of mediation you're doing. But if you're sort of creating sort of a form of equality, and we try to do that as much as we can, so we like two of us sit almost at the front and basically sort of give each other time, so that I think it's important for the clients to know that, because they're going to try to figure out, okay, who's really in charge here? That's part of their sort of who's really the one who's pulling the strings? Who's the one I really have to sort of focus my attention to? So I think it's important to keep in mind how you're working with time with each other, and that could be a way, as mentioned, through division of labor, etc. One of the things that we try to do, depending on the situation, even with opening statements, just allow one person to say, okay, what would you like to say? And then, of course, there's the back and forth, and then allow the other mediator to work with the other client. And sort of work it out to sort of, they should realize that you're a team. And here's the big thing, cost. This is the dollar. How are you going to make a living? Okay, so the truth is that actually mediation, at least for now, is not under any sort of insurance, right? So even though if anybody follows the counseling, any counselors here? Anybody doing counseling? Okay, fair enough. There was a movement of doing co-counseling and doing a lot of that type of work even in the counseling field, but the reality is it's very, very rare because the reality is it doesn't pay for insurance purposes. You come in to see your client and then you get a certain amount of money. So the reality is it's true with mediation as well. In fact, there's no insurance for mediation, so you can actually play with that, but the reality is you got to figure out, is this cost effective for you? Is this cost effective? So that's important. You can bring your price a little bit higher. Mediation in itself sort of has kind of fascinating. There seems to be a range in how much you should really be charging for mediation. It can go from, at least the numbers now, I would assume anywhere from $150 to $350, $400. Could be more. I don't even know. It depends on what you're trying to sell. So per hour. So again, one has to keep in mind that if you're going to be involved in co-mediation, see how that works for your practice. Anyway, united you stand. Remember that you're on the same team. Remember you're working together. Again, the more rapport you create with each other, that'll be better. And how about disagreeing with each other? Now here, again, Renee was talking about modeling. The reality is you will have you perhaps are not happy with what the other person said, or the other person not happy with what you were saying. That happens in a mediation. You might say to yourself, my goodness, why did they say that? So sometimes, you can correct the other person as we've corrected each other under circumstances. So in a way that, okay, that is an approach, but I think this is a different approach. Or maybe that's true, but I think if you go that route, you come onto other complications. So it's important to know and create enough rapport with each other that it's okay to disagree with each other. And as said, if you're dealing with two parties, especially those who are going through a divorce, and if they have children, so as I like to say, they're married except they don't share the same bedroom. The reality is if you have children, you're going to be dealing with your children almost all the time. So you're going to have to learn sort of to model that, and model disagreement can occur in the co-mediation situation.
Okay, so practically speaking, how can you do this? Well, first of all, we really recommend that you develop a rapport with your co-mediator. Sometimes if you're mediating with a community agency, or if you're mediating in some other, if you're not in private practice, even with the courts, you could be forced into a co-mediation or asked to do a co-mediation with someone you're not familiar with. So you may not always have time to develop a long-term relationship with that person. But even if you only have a few minutes, we really, highly recommend that you take some time, take a few minutes, find out how they like to practice mediation, find out a little bit more about whatever you can do to develop a rapport with them will go a long ways to helping you all cooperate within the mediation. Decide on a basic structure. How are we going to do this? Are we going to divide the labor? Are you going to observe the body language? What do you want to do? So take a few minutes to figure that out. you should decide on verbal and visual cues. So if you are deciding, what do I need to do if I think we need a break, or what do I need to do if I think you're going the wrong way with this, or we don't want to pursue that too far. Like, one of the things that with Stephen and I tend to dig a little deeper into the interpersonal, and so I kind of veer off into a little bit of counseling, and Stephen will have to pull me back. Okay, that's a good question. Do you want to focus on the agenda? Sometimes Stephen, because of his background, he'll start to practice a little law in the mediation and start giving legal advice, and I have to rein him back in and say, but you should definitely check with an attorney about that. So you need to figure out how you're going to help each other stay focused on that process within the mediation. And then Stephen and I started actually having formal check-ins with one another during our mediations. So when we caucus, we will have one party step out, we'll caucus with a party, we'll have that party step out, and we'll have a chat. What did you think? Did we ask all the questions? What other information do we need? We'll check in with each other formally. So I'm not sure if other co-mediators do that, because whenever you're training in mediation, you're learning, let the one party step out, caucus with them, make sure you give the other party equal time. But you can check in with your co-mediator, and you can take that time to have conversations that you need to have in order to make sure your process is effective. And choose your co-mediator wisely whenever you can. Choose wisely. There are lots of different ways to practice mediation. We practice a really facilitative style of mediation. There are evaluative mediators. There are lots of different ways. So if you are going to co-mediate with someone, make sure you at least agree on what kind of mediation you want to practice and how you want it to run and how you want it to look.
Just one thing with regards to checking in when needed. Depending on the situation, there may be times that actually there's an advantage, because depending upon where the parties are, a lot of times when you're mediating in court, it seems to be much more formal. They have lawyers there. There's a lot more tension between the clients, and many times they want you to do this like shuffling mediation. Usually when you're in a private practice trying to build that, usually they're coming, where they're not at that stage yet, they're willing to be in the same room with each other. And we find that actually if we are sort of checking in with each other, that they have some time together to check in with each other, and perhaps they might come up with something and sort of work it out, where it's not just here's the party and back and forth. But we found that actually to be helpful as well.
Yeah, and so our bottom line is that we really highly recommend co-mediation. I think it's really a benefit to you as a mediator. It's a benefit to your clients, because you have just greater experiences in the room and greater opportunities to connect. But you should be careful, because the cost can get out of hand if you are each experienced mediators and you're each looking to make a certain a fee on your hourly rate. You can pass that on to your clients if they can afford it and are willing to pay it, or you may have to take a cut. So you should be very careful of the cost that can be associated with co-mediation, and also just really choose your co-mediator wisely.
If I could close, and then we'll take questions, I was thinking about, if I may, Ecclesiastes, where it says the power 2 over 1, when one falls, the other's there to lift them up. And the truth is that it's always good to have a second pair of eyes in a mediation. It could make the difference, you don't know. Mediators have a lot of experience working on their own, and there's a lot of fun to that, and there's a lot that can be done. But thinking about the power that you have with 2, under those circumstances, you can really move forward with the mediation. You can create rapport perhaps even quicker. And again, the idea of modeling that occurs within the mediation. So we are big fans of co-mediation, and if you can put it as part of your practice, we highly recommend it.
So are there any questions? Yes.
Do you think most co-mediators split the fee, or do you think they charge their individual fees? In other words, a double fee?
Well, it depends on the kind of mediation, but in like domestic or private practice, I'm pretty sure that they may be, instead of doubling the fee, they may add a little bit to the fee and then split it. Unless you're in civil practice and you've got, big law firms paying a fee, I doubt you're gonna get a divorcing couple, unless they're, you know, a high net worth couple, to pay twice as much for the mediation. So I would guess that people are splitting the fee.
So they're just charging the marketplace fee and not splitting it?
And maybe a little bit above marketplace, but not twice as much.
I think it would make sense to charge extra for co-mediation, becoming that importance, come up with a fee. But if you would have a fee that is less, if you're mediating by yourself, I think it's important to charge a little bit more, so it's an advantage for the people that you feel you're getting something out of the co-mediation, and the mediators themselves. The mediators feel that they're making something. Well, so it's like not a disadvantage for them coming in and co-mediating.
Any other questions? Anyone in here practicing mediation right now? Okay. 1, 2, and 1 kind of, sort of.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm practicing.
Okay.
We're
but
doing it.
I'm doing it.
Doing
I
it
am
through the system.
doing co-mediation through the system, but not like this.
Okay.
Right.
So what kind of co-mediation are you doing?
At the university I work at, workplace mediation.
So are you working in the Ombuds office or in HR or under an umbrella of
I'm
conflict?
on a committee.
Okay.
And we are doing it for the university.
Okay.
And I was trained by the University System of Georgia, so sometimes I'm called out to mediating sessions on co-mediating.
On other campuses?
Mhm.
Okay. And are you all in the law school here? This group?
We do the Fulton County Court mediation.
Okay.
And our thing is civil. It's how.
Is that night court?
No, a day court.
Okay, good, good.
I'd be interested in your experiences with organizations, non-profits, associations, and the like.
You know, it's very interesting that you ask about that, because I've been doing some research on organizational conflict management, and it's surprising that, I guess in some ways it's surprising that nonprofits have a very, very high level of workplace conflict. Really, I think only second to educators, and well, actually it was nurses. So nurses have a high level of workplace conflict, but nonprofits do as well. Now, my experience with nonprofits has been mostly training and really working with employees on the front end. I guess, as Tim said, conflict awareness and how to kind of mitigate problems before they arise. The workplace mediation that we've done has, well, I mean,
We worked with a church
Yeah,
that had a conflict with each other. I mean, 2 employees, and they were pretty frightened because they didn't know what was going on here, what this was all about. That the ministers felt that it was necessary for them to get in the same room, but we worked out an agreement, sort of coming to. I think it was a very important point made at the spoke just before.
oh, Dr. Hadin.
Yeah, so when he said that, you have a dispute that's over a long period of time, and then you're trying to put it all together in 3-4 hours, it's kind of a very big job. But at least starting the process, creating something in writing, which is really, really powerful. And I do think, it's sort of thinking about, coming from the counseling perspective, you would call these things transfers and counter-transfers, that I represent the ministers over there, and so, what was the power that we brought into the room, how they felt comfortable, and we have to sort of create try as much as possible, and even playing field. They themselves had more power than the other, really, under the circumstances, but we were able to come to some form of agreement, and I think if there would be more places with a nonprofit organization who can look at mediation, it's going to save them money in the long run. It's a really great opportunity, and doing a co-mediation one was really helpful as well, because I think in organizations they deal with a lot of people. It's very different than, for example, if you would say in a divorce situation, which really they're going to deal with one judge. So you almost like the pre-judge it, saying, well, I'm not a judge, we're not judging, I'm not deciding any law and all that type of stuff. But sort of it seems to me that with organizations, co-mediation would make much more sense, because there's so many factors going on. It's sort of, they may be perhaps more used to having more than one person involved in the problem.
I was just thinking about large organizations that want to actually come to, like you alluded to some of the instances where like there's strikes and they're just too many parties. What is the cap, or at what point do you say, okay, 3 people is enough, 4 people is enough, or do we only want 2 mediators in the room? And also, if, you know, I bring my lawyer, you bring your lawyer, but do you ever get the chance, or the situation where someone says like, I want this mediator, the other party really wants this other mediator because they feel comfortable, not because they feel it's going to go their way, but because they respect the mediator. So
Right.
would there be the occasion where you co-mediate with somebody you haven't done it in the past?
I think sure. I mean, to answer the first part of your question, I can't imagine a situation where there will be more than 2 mediators. I'm not sure about that. But not to say that it couldn't be. I'm just very unfamiliar with any situations like that. But yeah, definitely, if there's, you know, people choose their mediators all the time in the court system. They have a whole list of mediators, and they, you know, look down and they choose one, whether it's because they're familiar with that person, or they've worked with that person before and thought them to be fair, or they think that they golf with that person and they'll make the case go their way. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons why people choose, you know, the mediator, and I think for certain someone could choose Stephen or choose myself and ask, you know, one of us to co-mediate with someone else. I mean, I can totally foresee a possibility where that can happen.
I mean, look, you have a system, a judge system that has more than, can have an appellate court that has more than, you know, 7, 8 judges. I mean, the Supreme Court has 9 judges. I mean, it's not like it's impossible to think about using mediators under those circumstances. I mean, it just seems maybe it's either cost prohibitive, maybe number 1, number 2, it depends on what the organization, when you have these big organizations, they might be very happy having 4 or 5 mediators when they're working together and trying to really hash it out. I mean, the more you bring in, there's the advantage of having more, but then there will be more questions that have to be, you know, who's going to try to, mediators, each depends. If they have a rapport with each other, they're working for a long time. I mean, you can even watch, I mean, if you go watch the judges and see how they're at a competition with each other, who's asking what question, what's going on, and the more people there, it could be there's more possibilities of competition. But I think in theory, one could argue more mediators could be better if you're able to work with each other.
May I ask another question?
Sure.
I'm not quite sure how I asked this. At what point, in terms of, within the context of co-mediation, do we begin talking about consensus building or facilitation, which introduces processes that differ from the mediation process?
Right.
So it becomes facilitated dialogue. Can you take it from there?
Yeah, I understand. Let me just say this. Sometimes I can get into a little bit of that, and we have to kind of rein it back and stay focused on the agenda because, you know, because our agenda is developed by our partners, right? This is what we came here to discuss. These are the things we want to resolve before we leave. And I think like what Tim spoke about earlier about thinking about mediation not as being confined to our 3 hours, but thinking about it in a longer term process, that's new. But typically what we think about mediations, we have these 3 hours and we want to hit these things that you've identified. And so if we start to get into that, you know, it can be tricky because you really do want to deliver a quality product, which is going to be the people who have come in with these issues to discuss, and you want to help them come to agreement on that.
I guess what I'm really thinking more in an organization situation.
Okay.
Where you have a sick organization and all kinds of problems. And sometimes some people may look at what needs to be done as an OD intervention. Others might say it's a real problem that before we even think about the OD part, we've got to start dealing with what we have.
No, I would agree with you. I mean, and let me just, you know, analogize what I believe you're saying. So if you have an organization and you're called in to do a mediation, during the course of the mediation, you realize it's really a much bigger organizational problem. I mean, you can only do what the organization is willing to do, right? So you can speak to the person who hired you and say, you know, based on what came out during this mediation, this is what I think you need an assessment. I think you need to consider some dispute design, you know, some policies. But you know, if the organization is only interested in the mediation, your hands are tied, but you can definitely make recommendations. And I haven't personally been in that situation.
I'll just add just that is specifically a case, you know, as it says, assessing of knowing what's in there. I mean, we had a mediation between a couple, and she wasn't sure whether she wants to stay or go. I mean, that happened to be. I mean, she came to mediation thinking that, you know, we're going to take care of this divorce, but in caucus, she wasn't clear, and we were trying to figure out what her needs are under the circumstances, and we came to an understanding that she wants a divorce. And what we did was we went through that case, and basically we only dealt with within those 3 hours, because we find, just a side point, that if there's a lot of property and then there's child issues, you can't do that in 3 hours. It's almost impossible. I mean, if you have a couple that comes in and says we don't have any children, we have a lot of property, you can really take care of that, I think, in 3 hours. But then if you're going to add the children, so we actually just dealt with the children. That was enough for them.
Yeah.
We came up to a solution, just understanding each of their needs. And she was clear, is this the need? What are you looking for? And she came, at least she's telling us, and she came to the conclusion that she wants a divorce. And then we worked out various needs and came up to a solution, I think, that was fair to the parties. So that answers your question, but again, it's just, okay, yeah.
When you explain to people that you're going to be co-mediating, do you run into any typical barriers or hesitancies on their part?
I haven't found it yet.
No, that hasn't been my experience.
That's how we do it. That's it.
But they don't raise any questions or have any qualms about it?
I haven't had it yet. It's just, you know, if this is what you do, you know, this is here and this isn't that, we co-mediate, and we'll see you next week. You know?
Where do you find you get most of your calls from?
At least for now, I found through the counseling center itself that I work in. I mean, I'm a counselor too, and then I sort of have a rapport with the counselors, and at some point they find that it's a good idea to bring it to mediation, especially when, you know, their work, counseling's not working out, so they come through there. That's been the best referral system for me. So again, that's a whole other discussion about making a living doing mediation. I think really one has to find a niche, and one has to find, you know, I think you have to really be up there. I mean, this is again my personal trying to do this. If that's the only way you make a living, I don't know if that's going to work for a lot of people. You have to find something else doing at the same time. Or if you're semi-retired, it's a great system as well. But I think you have to be cautious. You know, I mean, I'm trying various things myself, but I realize that, you know, the market is very, very thin. There's a lot of people out there doing mediation. So you have to really build your practice slowly, making sure, find the right people, and then you can hopefully get under something and create a niche for that. It's my own personal experience.
Are there any other questions? Any other experiences anyone would like to offer and share?
Well, we thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.